Dr. Emmanuel Gaima. We're also expecting the Honorable Attorney General, but he will join us he will join us at the high table when he comes in. All right, please, can we have volunteers for prayers? One Muslim and one Christian. Any volunteer?
Very close to me.
Yes.
Let us pray. Father, I want to thank you for this gathering. We give you praise, we give you glory, we give you honor. You say in your word, you are two or three, and that you are in their midst. Father, we pray that whatever we are going to discuss will be of national concern and will be beneficial to the people in the mighty name of Jesus. We cover her with the blood of Jesus. We speak against any evil plan. We thank you, Lord, in Jesus' name.
Engaging with the EMBs who are actually the masters of this game and the security sector. Very good conversation. And then we moved on Thursday with the Interreligious Council, and yesterday with the political parties. Today this is an expert panel followed by professional discussants. We're very happy. Principal executive advisor. I'm still learning. One call PS, about the secretary to the president, SP, Golo, and all invited guests. We are very happy to be associated with this process because international idea came to Sierra Leone around about 2021, 2022 on the invitation of the Electoral Commission for Sierra Leone. Following that invitation, a year later, the EU asked us to develop a governance program in support of the electoral process. So our principal partner have always been the 2 years, the Electoral Commission for Sierra Leone and the political party communications commission. Very happy that Chair, who has played a very important role in helping us in that process, is always around to support the process. After the elections, we had a very lengthy conversation with the EU and the Office of the Chief Minister. The question was, how then do we reshape Serbian democracy strengthening program funded by the European Union to ensure it is responsive to the contextual realities? And so it's been a very long period of engagement, of consultation, of ensuring that the program is adaptive enough to support the state institutions, and civil society to be able to move these processes forward. This is a union process. Once we finish the conversation with the Chief Minister, and Dr. Diana was fully involved in all of these conversations, we moved on to the Tripartite Committee Secretariat to see how we continue to support that process. Once we are done, we moved on to the Office of the Attorney General and Minister of Justice. Space where currently we have 5 experts sitting in the Office of the Attorney General and helping in writing the law. Good progress has been made. Almost 17 sections of the Constitution will change as a result of the recommendation of the Joint Committee. I'm sure by the time the AG comes, we will provide an update on what is happening. The essence of today's gathering, we'll talk about it, but we are very happy to support the Sierra Union process, led by Sierra Union, with Sierra Union conversations, and allowing us to take a decision in the electoral system and work with Sierra Leone. Please join this process, make your voice known, make your voice heard, and let's make Sierra Leone a better democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Idris. We then move over to the National Coordinator for the Tripartite Committee Secretariat, Golo Carter to give us a bit on the objectives for this consultations.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So first of all, I bring you greetings from the steering committee of the Tripartite recommendation implementation process. The steering committee is a bipartisan nature and a multifaceted institutional committee of about 20 people who are leading on this process, chaired by the Chief Minister. And this has come out of the fact that recommendation 8 speaks about how this process should be handled in terms of its implementation. And when it got to cabinet, the resolve of cabinet was to have a steering committee to do it. So the secretariat is just an operational wing of the steering committee. And as we lead on this process with technical advice from the Attorney General Minister of Justice, we're grateful to international ideas and European Union for supporting this. I mean, like Mahmoud said, today is an independent academic and practitioner-based expert engagement. I'm not going to call it a debate, but we actually want to have it really open up to very strong scrutiny in terms of looking at the two systems. And it will start with an expert conversation on the two systems. And after that, then we'll have a core of academic and practitioners who have seen, who know about this system, not in terms of knowledge, but they have also seen the system in practice in Sierra Leone and in the contemporary global environment. And so they will also discern what the two systems look like and bring to fore the core of recommendations around them for us. I mean, Sierra Leone has seen this system, being implemented equally. But we all know that there has always been very strong conversation about which one do we use and in the interest of the Sierra Leonean people. So that is why we're here. We have heard from the EMB's security sector. We have also heard from the Interreligious Council as a team, closed-door meetings. Yesterday we had conversation from all registered political parties. So, yeah. We initially expected it was going to be a very turning meeting because I've had engagements with them in course of the implementation of this process. But it was a very lively, interesting, also, and friendly atmosphere. And so it means that it borders on the interests of Sierra Leoneans, but also their own existence as well. So today, this group is also a very mixed group. We have both state and non-state actors are there, civil society, and young people, to listen and to also bring their own perspective into this. It is in your interest, especially those of you who are young people who are here, to show case in this conversation. And by the end of the day today, we hope that we could have brought very strong meaning to this discourse. This is a live program and it's deliberate. You realize that most of the other programs that we have run before now were closed programs because we really wanted the institutions to really speak about the issue. So we have created an environment for them to be off the camera. But at the end of the day, we have professional rapporteurs and facilitators who will lead on this process and give us a comprehensive report to move forward. So once more, thank you very much for all of you for coming. We really want to have some good time with you on this, and we hope that by the time we leave here, Sierra Leone will benefit from it. After this, we will move next week into the regions, and we're going to have 5 regional consultations as well. So you realize that we're bringing representatives of most of you who are here to the regions again, so that we can have those conversations. And after that, we will then have a report, and then we'll come back to have a national dialogue conference that we have in close of this, where we would have said, indeed, a cross section of Sierra Leoneans have spoken about this. Before it then gets to the steering committee, the attorney general, and who will change it into the law that it will have perfected to be, and then take it to Parliament. So once more, I'm very grateful that you're all here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ngolo. We will now go to the representative of the executive, principal executive advisor to the president, Dr. Emmanuel Gaima, who has been part of this process from the beginning, and we stand to benefit from the wealth of his experience. To give us his
Thank you. Thank you, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me bore you for 1 minute before I go to substance. On the 19th of June, 2024, the Tripartite Committee ended its official mandate, though it got some extension to finish the report, which was added to His Excellency the President on the 1st of July. I think the process that is ongoing really emanated from the methodology that is adopted. For those of you who are not in the room, when His Excellency decided in the State of the Nation address that he will look at a review of our electoral systems, it eventually culminated into a national engagement between the All People's Congress as the leading opposition political party and the government, leading to the agreement for national unity that had a resolution referred to as Resolution 3. For convenience, became known as the Tripartite Committee. It was the government, and I had the humble privilege of being appointed by His Excellency to lead as the co-chair and part of government. And then we had the All People's Congress. My friend and brother, Dr. Kepala Mara, was appointed by the All People's Congress. And we sort of had an independent arbiter in the middle, who was the UN resident coordinator, Serafi Wakala. And then the 3 of us steered the process for 6 months. And we eventually had the report, 8 recommendations. This process is important because what we did as part of the methodology was we refused to do the things that we say, let's vote. Voting is part of democracy. I want to tread cautiously because there are academic rules in the room. But in a democracy, there are winners and losers. And losers, if they are bad losers, may tend not to accept the outcome. And so we said, for every critical decision we take, let's do it by consensus, let's agree. And in instances where we did not agree, like for example, what we are going to discuss this morning to the afternoon, which was the electoral system going forward, we said, let the citizens be engaged in a consultative process. Because we are also mindful that 14 people we are representing 8.5 million people, and that we did not have all the ideas, and neither will we the most brilliant and knowledgeable people in the room, so the estimate. And I'm very pleased that as part of that extension of that recommendation, this process is ongoing. What I have been saying to the other groups to hear is basically, for us to be able to do justice to this process, I always say, let's assume that we have the other Sierra-Leoneans in the room. Today you are privileged because they may not be in the room physically, but virtually they are engaging. So what are the parameters that's going to guide decision making? What are we going to look for? Whether first past the post or it's going to be, we need to be focused on what the parameters are going to be. But perhaps more importantly for me, I believe we should focus on context. What is our national context and how should that context inform us? And I have said, and I continue to say,
that Sierra Leone is 64 odd years. If yes, so be it. If no, then what should we do about it? What should we bequeath to generation yet unborn? And then the other parameter, the other issue also I've been speaking about is the essence. What are we doing this for? Why are we investing? Why is the international idea investing resources? Why do we have our brothers and sisters coming from across the region, the sub-region, to help support us in this process? We should all be mindful about that also. But also I want to maintain that in doing all of this, as we did for the Tripartite, we have to bear in mind that the recommendations were proposals, but these proposals are anchored on the principle that the National Constitution of Sierra Leone, Act No. 6 of 19, remains to be the principal law, whereas we see the ground norm of the country. And so whilst it's a recommendation, until that constitution is amended, we have to be engaging, mindful that that's the constitution. That's one. Two, as auxiliaries to the constitution, there are several legislations that are in force. Those legislations also should be able to inform us as we engage. Again, until those legislations are repealed or those legislations are amended, they are enforced. So we must maintain a fine balance between how do we advance the intents and the principles of those recommendations against ensuring that we keep the Constitution unfettered or tampered with, but also respect our existing national legislations. That is a joke. I was telling somebody yesterday. One of the recommendations is saying that no census data should be used if it is less than 2 years to an election. Now, if there is a pending census that results will be 2 years before the pending election, and somebody says we should use it, will that be consistent with the recommendations? We have to pay attention to some of those as academics. And I want to end up by saying that the executive is firmly committed to the process. Even as His Excellency was, yesterday we had a conversation, he was asking where are we with the recommendations on the independent functional management review of the Electoral Commission of Sierra Leone. So there is commitment to roll out the recommendations as they come out, and we are also mindful as the executive that there are regional and sub-regional international instruments that keeps us within time frame to have this done. So the earlier we are able to bring closure to some of these, it will be better for us. I will also end finally by saying that you also have to help us, for those of you who are members of the panel, academics and student unions, that the other arm of government will have a significant role to play in this process, and that is the third arm, the normally called legislation. And so, in as much as theories tell us that we cannot keep them separate, very, very separate, but also the corridors and the boundaries of the legislature have to be respected. So when the Attorney General, as an arm of the executive, should have done all he has to do, there is also work that has to be done with the executive arm of government, for which all we can do probably is to submit and wait for the submission. I wish all of us a fruitful deliberation, and I want to join the team here to thank you for giving up this Saturday in the spirit of patriotism and national consciousness and national service. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And that brings us to the end of the first session. We are going to get into the next session. However, I'd like to, for those of us who haven't been with us for the past 3 days, I'd like to introduce our facilitators. We have 3 facilitators who are helping us with this process. Mr. Joe Pimabi, Valnora Edway, and an international expert, Chibeze Ona. But before they come in and I hand you over to them, please I'd like to beg us to go outside for a brief picture. It's going to be very brief, and then we come back and start. Just in front of you, right in front for pictures. Right, because I know some of us will leave before we end. Please, thank you so much.
My boss, my boss, is my
We push this one. What is your I'm not sure if this is perfect. Usman. Tell Andrew to tell him. I'll meet you. So bad.
The center, yes, it will be nice.
Forget it. Yes, yes.
Hello? Hello? Very good morning to you, ladies and gentlemen. And just quick SOPs. I was standing close to AIG just now, and something struck me that I need to talk about SOPs here, especially when I had a few phones ringing during the previous session. Please, can we just kindly check our phones again, because this is going to be live. That's one. Two, it's a live program, so let's, as best as possible, I know nature demands movement from time to time, but as best as possible, let's deal with that, please. Again, on behalf of my colleagues, I'm sure they will join me at some point, let me welcome you to this very important panel of conversation this morning. I'm just trying to get my notes for introduce the two very important people that are going to help us shape the conversation this morning. My name is Joe Hingobepemagbi, and I'm one of the consultants hired by International Idea for this initiative. So this morning we've got two expert panelists with us, and we're going to have at least 4 discussants that will take us through, that will really help to trigger some conversation on the topic that we're discussing here, which is really what we're trying to do to discuss a preferred electoral system for this country. You will note that for the last, since independence, I think especially post-war, post-war era, post-conflict era, we've swung between the two main systems of the first past the post and the proportional representation system. And that has been informed largely by our socio-political context, as well as our economic circumstances, and a few nuances here and there. But here we are today, on behalf of almost 1 million people, 8 million people, we are contributing to this very important conversation. So with us today, we've got Charlie Hughes, who is a governance and development consultant with a special focus on institutional development, local government, trade development, citizenship, and social accountability, civic education, and so much more. He's got over 20 years experience doing these things, writing, publishing articles on governance issues. We also have Gavin. Gavin has been with us for a while, especially with the EU. We're providing support on governance issues, where he's been assisting stakeholders, and particularly the Electoral Commission for Sierra Leone, building organizational capacities, improving technical aspects of election administration and implementation of electoral reforms. Gavin and Charlie Hughes, welcome to this session. And I'll introduce the discussants as we proceed today. Well, Gavin, you've been around for a while, providing support, particularly on institutional development. I'm going to start with you on this conversation today. First,
I'd like to throw light on your understanding. What's your understanding of the two electoral systems that we have explored as a country? Both the first past the post and the proportional representation system, electoral system.
Say a couple things up front before addressing the issue. Well, I'm very pleased to be asked to be speaking on such a panel as this, and it's actually the second time in about, I think, a week, so it must be an extremely topical topic, so to speak. And I'm happy to speak about it because it's something I've been working on for a good number of years in other countries and written a little about, so it's a subject I'm familiar with, but also now that I have spent a number of years here assisting electoral stakeholders, I have a fairly good understanding, layman's understanding of electoral history of Sierra Leone. So it allows me to participate with a little more, let's say, a little more gusto into the conversation. I also want to say that, just as a precursor, that to make it very clear up front that as a visitor, I do not have a preference. Because of what I've heard at some other events, I think people tend to think that the discussants have a preference of one electoral system over another, and that's clearly not the case. So I'll try to be very even-handed in any remarks today about the pros and the cons of the system. But certainly as a person working on a project for the EU, you know, it's not my position to advise on what you should do or what I think is better for you. That's not the case. But what I can do is later, when certain decisions in principle are taken, I'm very happy to advise on technical details of how to implement systems or how do we mitigate some of the effects that this system has that we're not happy about, but we know we're going to get. But how can we do it? How can we do it differently? Because electoral systems are an incredibly complex process, or an incredibly complex formula almost, and we'll talk about the definition in a second. So going back to your question, electoral system, I guess you asked on the basis of the first past the post and PR. I think I'm looking around the room, I think most people have a pretty good understanding of these two systems. I'll just repeat them in very basic terms, just to get us all on the same page. I think that the first past the post system, I would summarize it as saying, in a few words, I would say more votes, most votes or more votes wins the seat, right? It's probably one of the more simple election concepts to understand. If I get more votes than my opponent, I win. Even if I only get 2 votes in an election, even if I only get 1 vote, I can still win because I got more votes than my opponent. There's many other aspects of first past the post systems. Some of them, for example, the hallmark, I think, is that the idea of constituencies or single member districts. I think here you often refer to them as constituencies. With a first past the post system, you're only competing for the 1 seat, right, in each election. While you may have a general election with many seats for the parliament, it's actually a series of individual elections. So there's always 1 seat up for grabs. And the reason why I say more votes wins or most votes wins is because in the first past the post system, you only need to win more than your opponents. Unlike a system which is often called the brother to the first past the post system, the 2-round system, which is in the same family of electoral systems, and you do have a 2-round system here for the highest office in the land, is where it's not enough just to win the most votes, you actually have to win a threshold. You have to get over a threshold, whether that's 55 or a qualified majority, a 50 majority or a qualified 50 race. Changing the size of the parliament has some effects on the electoral system, but by these you have done here in Sierra Leone, you've used 2 different types of boundaries, right? Was it 96? You have a national PR system. You use the existing boundaries of the country. That was your electoral district. It's also called a uninomal district. Now in 2002 and in 2023, you use something called the district-based system, which you refer to as a district block system. And there you also used existing boundaries, whether it's the 14 or the 16 districts. Those were your new boundaries, and within those boundaries you drew a number of seats. right? Now in 2023, the big difference was the seats were awarded proportionally, meaning the seats were allocated, proportionally. So the higher populated districts got a higher number of seats, lower number of seats. And that's done to ensure and what we call equality of the vote, right? So that my vote in, let's say, Carignan isn't worth more than your vote in Western Urban. So that's the idea behind that. You also had the system in 2002, but because the population boundaries were not, the population numbers were not as well known, it was a policy decision to have an equal number of seats per district. And I suppose the last thing I'll say about proportional representation is that usually you use existing districts. Either you use your district boundaries or you use some other existing administrative boundary because they're well known, right? People are familiar with them and it's easier. But you can also have a system whereby you draw those boundaries as well. What if you decided, well, I like PR, but I want to have 10 districts? Well, Sierra Leone maybe doesn't have 10 natural boundaries. So the Electoral Commission or another authority can actually draw 10 boundaries based on population totals, and then you can award your districts among those 10 different, they would be constituencies basically. So there's more than one ways to decide how you're going to allocate your seats. But the bottom line is that the PR, you have to have more than one seat up for contest.
Thank you for those introductory remarks.
Can you hear me? Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you so much, Gilbert. No matter, should we decide to go to the first past the post or the proportional representation system, what parameters do you think should be looking at? What parameters do you think we should be looking at, we should be considering seriously to help us select? Because at this juncture, what we're trying to do here is really select, just choose a particular electoral system. But I'm sure for us to be able to do that, we need a set of rules or criteria.
Well, I think that what I will say is that there is and these are not new. There's a classic list of advantages and disadvantages to each one of these systems, right? And these are, some of them are absolutely true because they're borne out just in the way the mathematics works, and some of them are true, I would say, only because the literature says they are, meaning a series of scholars have made observations over a number of electoral systems over a number of decades and said, okay, this generally happens with this system. So those advantages and disadvantages, I won't have time to go into all of those disadvantages and advantages right now. I can give you the main hallmarks, and then I will give you a big asterisk after those. Big asterisk, which I'm going to come back to when I describe it. So, and some of the, apologies again if these aren't already well known, but first past the post, and I'm going to try to do an equal number of advantages for each system so that I don't get accused later on of favoring one over the other. I have 6 down on each, but I probably won't have time to do that. But let's think about it. First past the post. A lot of people say it's an advantage system because it's the easiest to understand, right? It represents like schoolyard politics where, I'm running for some school representative and, I can understand the concept. Whoever gets more wins, right? It's a simple contest. It's something that people learn at a very early age. It's ingrained in our system. So that's one advantage that people say is good about first past the post. Another advantage is that it encourages these broad tents or broad churches or whatever you want to describe. With first past the post systems, because you need to win, it's not enough usually to win 20% of the vote, right? You need to win more than your opponent, which is at least, a guarantee is 50, but at least maybe 40, depending on how many candidates there are. So to win that, I just can't worry about this little, let's say this village over here, or this community, right? I can't worry about this community, because there's a lot of communities in my district. So I can't cater to only them. I've got to worry about maybe several communities and what they're interested in. Maybe these are tradesmen or merchants or what have you. So I've got a policy about business, I want to lower taxes, whatever. But then I also maybe have an agrarian district, right? I have a lot of farmers in my district. So then I also need to think, I don't want to alienate the farmers, so I need to also, include that in my platform, something that they're gonna. So I have to sort of cater to everybody a little bit and try not to alienate too many people in order to win the seat, to be competitive. So that's sort of seen as an advantage of having these systems, because it encourages a party or a candidate to sort of encompass a lot of different constituent interests. Another advantage that I often hear in the debate here is that it provides a direct link to constituents, right? That's often touted as an advantage of first past the post. And I will say it is true that first past the post is going to be the smallest unit of an electoral area that you can have. Remember, for PR, you have to have at least, you could have two, it's very rare, but you could have a multi-member district, so you're going to have, it's got to be a bigger geographic area, whereas first past the post is your smallest area. So it is true, it's more likely you'll know the candidate, and it's more likely you'll at least know where the candidate's office is in the center of the district. That's an advantage that's often touted for first past the post. I think it's also, in some countries, there's a strong tendency of independent candidacy. I'm not saying that's true here, but in some countries, political parties are not as powerful or not as dominant in the electoral game. So the independent candidates are very much a part of certain countries', let's say, electoral dynamics and electoral history. And the independent candidate, because again, you have a small district, it's obviously easier. I'm not saying it only happens, it's also possible in PR, but it's generally considered to be easier to win the seat in PR. So those are often some of the advantages. I think I went through about 4. Under PR, and I won't go advantage, disadvantage, because what you'll find in this debate is the advantage of one system is just the disadvantage of the other system, right? And that's what makes it an advantage, is because it does something better than the other system. So with the PR, the number one advantage I think people say is the fairness principle, right? Because the name proportional, it means your seats, your vote share, whether it's 10%, 20%, 30%, is 75%, is going to approximate the number of seats that you get back in the parliament, right? I said approximate, it's definitely not always that proportional, but it's definitely more guarantee that it will be closer to proportional under a PR system. It's also favorable for generally if you have smaller parties or medium-sized parties that have support across the region, let's say across the district, across the, whatever it is you're competing in, maybe the country. You have support in all the areas, but you don't have support concentrated in one area, because first past the post, you need to concentrate your support, right, to win the seat. So if a party has 15 to 20% of the vote across the country, let's say in a national PR system, they might not be able to get that many votes in the parliament if they don't concentrate well enough in certain districts to win those first past the post systems. I mean, look at reform in UK, for example. They'll be I guarantee that's going to be in their platform if it's not already, because they won a large share of vote in the last UK general election, but because they use a first past the post system, they came in second in a lot of contests, but only won maybe 4 or 5 seats. So that's often an argument that's put forward for PR. Another one is that to accommodate minority interests or quotas. Now, I don't want you to go away thinking that you can't have quotas under first past the post. That's not true. So, but I will say that it's often easier to understand how the quota is implemented and easier to write it into the electoral system, just easier, not absolute. But it's a little easier often under the PR system, and that's often touted as an advantage. I think the last one I'll say, to make it even, I think, is it is slightly easier for an election body and a budget to implement PR. But I want to come back to this later. But because of certain dynamics of an election and how to administer an election, and things like by-elections, that is often put forward as an argument. But there is a big asterisk on this, and I don't have to talk about it now, but what I will tell you with all of these and others, and I have a few examples that I thought of, is that it's not enough just to talk about the advantages. You really need to scrutinize these advantages and disadvantages. Why do I say that? It's not simply a matter of a checklist. I've got this many pros, this many pros. Okay, this got 13 advantages, this one has 12, I'm gonna go with the 13. It doesn't work like that. Each one of these advantages and disadvantages are, let me say, number one, you need to think about, does it apply in my country, you know? Because this is the universe, this is the literature, right? And I can say, I do believe it. It is relatively true, generally speaking, a lot of these advantages and disadvantages. But there are exceptions to all these norms in countries, right? There are times when that first past the post system ends up with a more proportional result than a PR system. It just happened to come out that way. There are times when a PR system is, well, I already said that example, but you know what I'm saying. So each one of those examples, you can actually see the opposite, you can actually see it not come true. And you also have to scrutinize it finally. At the end of the day, you can't have it all. So you have to decide which one's really important for me, right? You're gonna end up with negative aspects of your electoral system. It's unavoidable. And actually there are ways to mitigate those, and that's like sort of the next level. Like when we talk about after a system is chosen, how can we mitigate some of the effects of, you know, residency or what have you, like the effects of that we don't like of the system we chose. But the point is you have to see what you can live with and see what's really important to you when you make the choice.
Okay, great. Thanks for laying that foundation for this conversation again. Charlie, you are the saloon man in the room. I'm not saying Gavin is not. He's been around for a while. I think a saloon boy. I want to see. So yeah, Gavin has been around, but Charlie, you are the saloon man in the room. What contextual issues should we be looking at for this selection process? Because we're looking at best past post, we've used it like 3 times. We've also used PR like 3 times. So what contextual issues? I mean, as a Sierra Leonean, but not just because we're Sierra Leonean, based on the work we've done, based on articles we've written, your understanding of the governance landscape, what contextual issues should we be looking at, should we be considering here?
Thank you, Joe. And it is exactly on account of contextual issues that I want to go back to the point made by Gavin regarding the framing of the topic, the preferred electoral system. And he made a point that as panelists or discussants and as influencers here, it is really not proper for us to be making simplistic choices or preferences that this is what I want and this is not what I want. So from the standpoint of the Sierra Leonean context, you know how easily framing those choices can degenerate into a choice of colors. So a proper way to, you know, framing matters, and that would have been an easy standpoint for all of us to agree on why we are doing this. So I would have said, how do we do systems engineering that yield outcomes that you all can live with? You're going to find it very difficult for any party supporter to say, no, I don't want to do systems engineering that we can all live with. So when you say, so once we agree on that point of takeoff, and let me make this point that no democracy is perfect, and no democracy can never be perfect. So systems engineering is a constant work. So what we are doing basically, we are re-engineering our system based on what we've learned over the years to yield outcomes for all of us, and that is my point of departure in the contributions that I will make. I'm not making a case for one system against the other system. So deepening the contextual issues that will help us to decide where to go. Let me go back to the advantages and disadvantages that Gavin raised, drawn from a comparative practice around the world. There's a way we can actually situate Sierra Leone within those narratives and say, you know what, let us deepen the conversation around, say for instance, broadening representation. It's easy. Multi-member systems allow broader representation than single-member systems. Let me give you an example that we have constituencies in this country where you have 2 or 3 ethnic groups, and one ethnic group is really dominant. And on the basis of historical experiences or their economic preferences or whatever it is, they choose to vote for certain parties. So if you in a single member constituency, if my tribe constitutes 50% of the population of the voting population, I can easily decide to I can win in elections and disregard the other people in my constituency. What the PR system provides for is to say we can have significant representation. If when people vote, they vote different sentiments, religion, ethnicity, choice of economic policies, they vote for. So if they have significant numbers behind their sentiments, they should be represented. So there is no harm in saying, Protocol District, give us 10 of your best citizens. If 7 comes from one party, 3 comes from another party, what should be difficult with that? We've seen the outcomes already for women representation. In terms of broadening representation, in the context in which we live, PR is kind of more suitable to what we are facing. He alluded to the cost of elections. So both at the personal level, you know what the cost of campaigning means. I mean, we've done studies around the cost of campaigns for women candidates. You know, and it was really not. It's been difficult for them until you know the magic PR play in getting them to that 30% threshold. So both at the cost of the individual and at the cost to the state, we've had experiences that shows that this is where Sweden should go. And I've not even talked about the peace dividend. As we sit here, we've changed, we've replaced members of parliament without any gunshot being fired. Think of the situation in which we live today, the challenges we've had with security over the years. I think we've had like 11 or 12 replacements of MPs. If we were to have by-elections in the context in which we live, you can imagine the accompanying security challenges. Yeah. So, and we finally, in terms of contextualizing things, multi-member systems will allow cooperation at the district level. We live in a situation where the political parties have huge sway over their elected over their MPs. So let me give you this example. If a rogue cabinet member was to go into contract with a foreign entity to say, you know what, let's dump toxic waste in Botloko. In the system in which we live, all APC MPs are likely to vote against it. All SFP MPs are likely to vote for it. In a multi-member constituency, you will easily find convergence in the interest of the APC and SFP MPs because they don't want toxic waste in Botloko. So it's a system that really facilitates cooperation in the context in which we find ourselves today.
Thank you. I'll just push you a little more. The advocates will say, Charlie, that the women got the 30% not because of PR, it was the giveaway legislation that gave them the 30% opportunity. Whether we're all satisfied with the 1 to 3 ratio, that's another question. That's another kettle of fish that we'll get involved with.
Yeah, but you can still have the act, but it's more difficult to instrumentalize the act in practice under the first past the post. So the act is just a piece of legislation. So the PR makes it easier to instrumentalize it in practice. You know, so we've always had aspirations for increasing women representation in parliament, and we've never achieved it. So it is really not. Giveaway is just a preparatory legislation to force you to do what should be done, but it is actually a system that allowed it to happen.
And the ratio, And selfishly, the way the parties did it was, after 2 men, they dropped 1 woman, instead of maybe 1 man, 1 woman, or 1 woman, 1 man.
Yeah, so this is the advantage of PR. It allows innovation more than, as Gavin described it, the playground and majoritarian system. So we can actually sit here. The good point is we've had PR systems for like 3 times now. So we can go back and reflect on some of these issues and say, so how do we make it better? You know, let me. I have a friend of mine who was from the diaspora, a medical doctor. He volunteered in his community. Very nice guy. This guy was placed 6th on his party list, and he couldn't make it to parliament because the other considerations for competence, for different kinds of representation are left in the hands of the party leaders. So the point I'm making is there's more room for designs and engineering that will build on our experience, that will yield us better benefits. Which I mean, cross pass the post, there's really nothing. Put a box here, put your box here. You get 59, now you win. Everybody loses. Yeah. But so I love the question you've raised, and these are some of the things that we need to bring out. You know, how were the allocations done? Were they done in ways that empowered the membership of the party? You know how the first past the post system is. People can really come with money, they bribe the Secretary General, they get symbols, right? So so that means the so that means the parties are supposed to be the membership is supposed to drive the life of the party. You know, so we know how the award of symbols can be manipulated here. So we actually need to. Yeah, so we actually need to bring out some of these issues to see where the weak points were and see how they can be perfected. But the point is, we have more leverage in innovation with PR than with first pass the system.
Great, and let me just remind all of us, I mean, in the room, but also I'm sure we've got people watching on the SLBC, AYB, and I think Liberty TV, that even the TRC, the recommendations of the TRC make reference to allocation of seats for various interest groups, which I'm going to get into very shortly with you. For women, for persons with disability, and young persons. So those are factors that I just want to throw out there. For Gabby, I mean, we often tend to just box the whole PR as one unit. And there are various forms of variants of the PR. Can you just throw light on 1 or 2 so that people just have a fair understanding of the variants of PR, the various forms of PR? Quickly before we get into the full conversation.
Okay. Well, sure. I think I've already thrown a little bit of that discussion out there already in my opening remarks. So, in terms of proportional representation, I mean, you have. Let me think about this. You have different systems of proportional representation. First question you need to ask yourself is in PR, what is going to be my electoral area, right? Am I going to be competing in PR within the districts like you have in the district block system that you used twice previously? Or am I going to be competing national like you used once previously? Or something else altogether? You know, are you going to lump a few districts together and create these 4 electoral regions? And then you could have PR in those regions. The thing I want to mention the thing to think about is that, and I've got to make sure I say this carefully to get it right. The larger the district, the larger this zone is, the more proportional your result is going to be. What do I mean by that? When you have a district with only 4 seats, like Koinadugu, or a district, with 5 seats, like Guam, your results might not be as proportional as they would be if you had, for example, either national PR or in another district with more seats. The reason being is just when you do the math, when you're dividing a small number of seats, there's going to be a margin when you divide the number of votes. There's going to be a margin where someone's going to win that seat and someone's not going to win the seat. And it tends to just work out through the wonders of mathematics, that if you have a lot of seats, it's going to be more proportional. If you have a few seats, it's going to be less proportional. So you need to think of that as a consideration as well. Because then you get into the issue of the threshold, right? It may be, I can be very honest when I say the threshold here was a legal threshold, right? It was 11.9% legal threshold. In 2002, it was a more practical threshold. It was part of the formula that if you didn't make the number of seats needed when you divided by the total number of votes, then you were excluded from the total, which was a de facto threshold of 12.5%. But with these very small districts, the legal threshold didn't come into play too much. And what do I mean by that? If a party wins, 15% of the vote in Falaba or Koinadugu or even Bonk, it might not get a seat anyway, right? It passed the legal threshold, but it might not get a seat anyway just because there's only 4 or 5 seats up for grabs. So that's something to think about as well, the threshold. Now the other aspects of the threshold, when you had in terms of the legal threshold, I would just say, well, it's pretty obvious. You can have a threshold or you cannot have a threshold. The effects of a threshold, it's usually a policy decision. In 2002, it was not really a policy decision. It was more of a product of the electoral system. But it might have been a policy decision in there somewhere, whoever designed that system in 2002. I don't know, I wasn't around. But it's generally a policy decision about keeping the parliament manageable, right? Sometimes you want a minimum level of support for a political entity in order to have them enter the legislature, right? So you may decide that's 5%, 7%, what have you, but it's a policy decision where you decide that they need to represent a certain number of votes before I'm going to give them the microphone, right? in front of the national legislature. And that's done in a lot of countries, for example, because countries sometimes have dozens of parties in the parliament and it becomes somewhat unworkable. It may also be because it's very hard to get a majority because you have to create these big coalitions from parliaments and they're always changing and it makes legislating and governing difficult. So there's a reason for to have a threshold. It's a policy decision, but you also have to decide, do we really need a threshold? Because by having a threshold, of course, you're going to exclude some parties. I can tell you, if you had a national PR and you didn't have a threshold, you would have even more seat parties than came in 1996, probably, because there are parties that have some support, but it's very small. So it just depends on what your policy decision is on that threshold. I'll lastly say about the threshold, there's also a psychological effect of thresholds. When there's a threshold, that goes into the calculation of the party. So the party may say, I'm not going to compete in the stronghold, or I'm not going to compete in District X or Y because I can't make the threshold. I'm better, or the financial backer may say, I'm not going to back this party, right? Because they're not going to make the threshold. So thresholds have both practical effects and psychological effects. So that's one. The other difference in PR, I won't explain it just because I want to give the microphone back, but that needs to be mentioned, is the seat allocation formula, right? The highest remainder, similar to the Hare, I think, method was used in Sierra Leone, but there's at least half a dozen used, probably more that I'm aware of, formulas that you can use to allocate seats in PR. Now, those allocation of seats, don't get me wrong, if you got 30% of the vote, you're still going to get roughly 30%. It's not going to magically change it so that you get twice as many seats. But those allocation formulas are very interesting to look at because some allocation formulas favor the bigger party in the seat allocation, and some favor smaller parties. And what do I mean by that? I mean, when you drill down to let's say there are 8 seats, when you get down to the 6th, 7th, the 8th party, you're often rewarding seats on remainders, under the current system. But under some of these other formulas, the seats are sort of put in a schematic. And it sort of helps the smaller or the larger party, depending, to move up a little bit in that schematic. So there's very interesting studies you can look at how the same results can produce slightly different legislature. So it just depends whether you want to encourage more pluralism, in favor, or whether you want to avoid the pluralism when you're designing your electoral system. And again, you're usually designing the system based on experience and based on trying to get a policy outcome.
Great, because at the end of the day, what we're looking out for, representation is key in all of this, whether it's first past the post or the PR system. I'll share this with you. Yesterday, we had the political parties in this room, and they were advocates for a bigger threshold and for a smaller threshold. Someone said 3%, and one of the bigger party guys said no, they will overcrowd our parliament. And the two, what happens to the paramount chiefs? Another recommendation was that let's knock the paramount chiefs out and follow the Ghana model and have a house of paramount chiefs. But Dr. Spence and others will share their experience at some point about the motivation for even having trade unions in parliament in Sierra Leone at some point. Because we have Labour Congress, SLTU and others in parliament at some point in this country when some of us were very old people. Yes, Dr. Spence and others have to ask you. But Charlie, again, I'll run back to you. Looking at the quota system, looking at the threshold conversation that we've been having. And I know that was a major source of contention, major disputes around it. I mean, looking at our context, socio-political context, what do you think, what are the implications of a quota system? Which of this system could address some of our challenges going forward? But let me also, before you come, let me also hasten to mention that there is a midway, there's a hybrid between the PR system and the first past the post. So, Charlie, you can go ahead. I'm sure the discussant will throw some more light on all of this.
And that was the point I was going to talk about, whether there is a way to innovate around first past the post to yield the benefits that we want. Now we know what we want. We want better representation. We want politics, a system that minimizes the cost of politics. We want a system that minimizes violence. We want a system that promotes cooperation between political parties. So we have agreement on that. And we have, Andrew, Freddie, and Dr. Spencer maybe to reflect on that, whether it is possible to, like I said earlier, with PR, the room for innovation, with all the mathematical considerations for representation, for, there's greater room for innovation. So, but is there a way of, or have we had experiences where first past the post has been reworked to speak to the benefits that we've all agreed on? So that is something I would love people here to reflect on. So for me, if you come up here and say, you know what, there is a way we can redo first past the post and yield broader representation, mitigate violence, reduce the cost of politics at the state level and at the level of individuals, then why not? So that's why I said earlier, for me, it's really not a question of which one is preferred. It's a question of how do we deliver on what we want. So coming back to the quota issues, I am not a mathematician. If you do your calculus correctly and in ways that facilitate broad representation, like the TRC mentioned, they are concerned about disability, women, and stuff like that. So why not? So the threshold questions are issues that will be left to the systems designers, those who are going to design it. But they must be guided by our aspirations. We want a system that yields this, and this, and then they can do the mathematics around it. And like I said, if we can also do the redesign around them and first past the post and then get the same outcomes, then why not?
No, I'll be happy to jump in and
join us.
sure, and I'll just try to respond to that because I heard something of this hybrid or mixed or whatever. I was going to say that. So there's a couple of ways you can. You were talking about getting the benefits of both, or so for example. So one I mentioned was in some countries you have first past the post, but because I guess policymakers said we like first past the post, but we really don't like that somebody wins 38% of the vote and then they represent the whole legislature. They got less than half the vote. So they designed this thing called a two-round system, right? Which is where if you don't get 50% of the vote in a first past the post contest, in the first election, you go to a runoff. So there has to be another election 2 to 3 weeks later. The upside of that is that you get more proportionality, right? You get, in the second round, first round people vote their heart, second round they vote their head, right? Because they can vote for someone who doesn't make it. In the next round they'll take the policy choice that most appeals to them that's left. Usually it's 2, it can also be another threshold that could maybe even have 3 in a runoff. But of course, one of the things I mentioned at the beginning was the trade-off, right? You always have a trade-off. The trade-off there should be pretty obvious, and it's very expensive. It's not very expensive, but it's more expensive. And you can imagine if you had an election, sometimes when you have a runoff here, it's a big deal just to have a presidential election runoff. Imagine if half of your constituencies were holding elections again 3 weeks later to determine who won between the top 2, right? A lot of countries do it. It's not uncommon. It can be done, and it's what people want in countries. But it is going to be a larger burden on the state budget to have another election in 2 weeks' time, and it's a larger burden on the election administration, right? So it's a consequence of the trade-off. The other way is this hybrid I've heard called hybrid, I heard it called mixed, I heard it called sometimes parallel. I won't go in, there's actually there probably is hundreds of different variants of this system. And I actually just learned, I didn't know that Guinea maybe has such a system. I'm not sure if they still have it, and I know South Africa has it, I think, for the local level, where some of the councillors or some of the legislators are elected on a district drawn where you have a constituency, first past the post. And some of the legislators are elected on a proportional list system, right? Now, it doesn't have to be 50-50, it could be 40-60, it could be 60-40. So that's why you have so many versions. But that's one way where you can get the benefit of both systems. You can get more proportionality and still maintain some constituent representation. But of course, the drawbacks are, well, you get the benefits of both and the drawbacks of both, right? So you end up, your districts, think about it, will have to be, unless you're going to increase the size of the parliament, which is probably not going to happen, you're not going to double your parliament. Your districts for your single member, for your first past the post, are going to have to be drawn a bit bigger, right? So if you draw that district bigger, then suddenly that benefit of knowing your MP is not as strong, right? Because now the MP's district is huge. So there's less of the benefit of first past the post. But you also get the benefit of the PR through that system. So those are just 2 policy designs on that.
So, interesting note to end, the best of both worlds, and end up voting with the head, or next time you go to your head. But I know we're going to continue struggling to get the best of both worlds in this case, or wherever we get. But let me just mention a few examples. Namibia, they use a closed list system, which is what we've been using here in Sierra Leone. So the parties present their list to the ECSL, and when a candidate or legislator passes away, someone just pops up from the list of substitutes. It's all now. So the list is full. So someone pops up on the list. Opportunity to identify candidates. So these are things that I'm sure the discussants. We've got 3 discussants in the house today. 4, huh? Yeah. Dr. Spence, I refer to you, Dr. Spencer, Dr. Julius Spencer. I don't know how to introduce you. Anyhow, Dr. Spence, He's a media professional, theater academic, being a politician at some point. He's a father, he's a mentor, he's been around. He's our guru. But he's also had very strong views about electoral systems in the country. He's published a few articles around in the last couple of years. So Dr. Ojilo Spencer is one of our discussants. We also have Dr. Fredlin Mokmokhill, who is professor of Seton Hall University School of Diplomacy, but also spent quite a chunk of her time at Institute for Governance Reform, IGR, here in Sierra Leone. And we also have a troublesome fellow here, Andrew Lovely, who is also with the IGR. Those are our 4 discussants. And Madam Lena Thompson, this IGR people confused me. And we have Madam Lena Thompson, Director of Institute of Gender Research and Documentation, correct? Yes. In Gradov, Oaks University, Kobe College, and lecturer in political science. So we're going to have academics and practitioners throwing their views into this conversation here today to support. So, Dr. Spencer, I think we need someone here. Just give us a few seconds. Okay, so now we have, so now we've got Madam Lena Thompson, who is lecturer at political science, Kobe College, Dr. Julia Spencer, Andrew Lovely, and Madam Fredlin Mokmokhill. They've joined 2 experts in the room. Madam Lena, you are an academic, lecturer in political science. Your thoughts on our electoral systems, on the 2 electoral systems that we've used in this country. Yes. Over to you, Madam Lena.
Thank you very much. I'll go first. Anyway. I'll try my best. Yes, in terms of what we have been discussing, for me, I was talking to Fred a few minutes ago, and she said, I know you were PR. And I said, yes, at some point I was leaning there. But I have certain kind of reservation about it. My contention is, it doesn't matter what electoral system that we use. What matters is how we use it. It's the context. We have to realize where we are in terms of our awareness, our education level. So, and we also have to realize that elections are high tension in Sierra Leone. Right now, we see violence right now. So we have to take that into context as well. Whatever system that we put in place, we have to address those issues that we have in Sierra Leone for us to ensure that if we put PR eventually, if we put first past the vote, we also get effective people there. My other point is that of we've spoken about the representation. PR does give us that broad base, okay? And
we are a country that has a dominant two-party system. With PR done properly, we can be more inclusive in terms of women, in terms of those people with disability. But it goes further than that. We have to look at the various tribes here. PR allows us, if it's done properly, it allows you, there are lost tribes in Sierra Leone. And those people also are subsumed in the two tribes, or the majority tribes. You also have to give them a room to be included as well. But at the same time, when we talk about representation, we also have to look at, yes, we can have more women, we can have more tribes, and so forth. But we have to look at effective representation. Who are those people that are going to be there? We can have peer, and the list system is there. What are the political parties? At the end of the day, the political parties are the ones who are making these kinds of decisions. If we have these parties who are undemocratic in the way that they elect people or select people, whatever system that we have would not make any difference. We have to ensure that, so in those contexts, that is why I'm saying we have to address the issues surrounding the elections. Political parties are the key to this. I'll give you an example. 1997, the elections in the UK. Tony Blair had a system of women-only list. That election saw more women elected under FPTP than any other election. So it actually takes the political party, the will of the political parties, to elect women, to put women in seats that are safe, and to bring them in for them to be elected. So whether you have PR or not, you say we have more women. How effective are these women? I'm a woman, yeah? But we have to look at the effectiveness of representation. So what, at the end of the day, the reason we have elections is so that we choose those people who are suitable to represent us, and represent us effectively. So we also have to look at Parliament itself. When we're talking, how effective have they been in representing us? Yes, we can have it. Yes, we will have more women, as I said before. But how effective would it be in terms of governance? So for me, I don't have any kind of preference. My issue is that we have to look at our system, our value system as a society. We have to look at issues surrounding election violence. We have to look at issues as our development, educationally. Most people don't understand. We live in a society where maybe 75% of people do not understand these things. We have to look at the management, electoral management. How do they disperse information and so forth? So I will stop there for now, but my take is that we need to look at our issues that are surrounding this kind of discussions.